All right, I got my thumbs up. It means it's time to go. So I'm really excited to have this discussion. David and I met, I guess, for the first time probably 2 weeks ago in Dubai, where we were also working with Wrapped. And we had a stellar conversation. So I'm excited to kind of delve in again. We're going to start from the beginning for anyone here that doesn't know Pipe. So where do we begin, David? Maybe let's talk a little bit about your background. You're working with some co-founders that you've worked with previously. Tell us how you got to this point.
Yeah, so 25 years in engineering, entrepreneurship. Um, Previously exited a company called Elemental to AWS. The product's now in the AWS console. So if you want to go pay, I think like $10 a minute for processing incredibly high quality video that's there. So we basically had every customer on earth except I think YouTube. They had their own video processing. But if you watch NFL, sports, news, Netflix, those were all our customers. So it's a really great time. We onboarded some major companies like Hulu, Amazon Video, and that's where we learned about what we're working on now, CDNs. So for example, Amazon Video had about half a dozen CDNs they contracted out with, and unfortunately there's no CDN on earth that can provide adequate coverage across all the geographic regions. And, thinking about that many years later, we're like, wow, you could probably use blockchain to, pay out bounties and incentives to get nodes in those particular areas. So we're just kind of continuing that path of like trying to innovate streaming video and delivering data very fast.
And so for anyone in this room that maybe isn't familiar with CDNs, what are they? Why are they important for internet infrastructure today? How have they typically worked? And how is Pipe reimagining how they might work?
Yeah, so CDN's been around for roughly about 25 years. It started out of MIT, and it's right when the internet was kind of starting to get more users. And today, basically, any site with more than a few thousand users has to have a CDN, or the servers will crash. So the CDN kind of distributes all the request load. They'll cache the data. They'll do a lot of really sophisticated routing around the world to get the data into the hands of the users very quickly. It's essentially impossible to run anything at scale without a CDN. So like today, for example, everyone on the internet uses a CDN. So if you go to Gmail, you go to Netflix, you go to CNN, Fox, whatever your favorite websites are.
Not CNN.
Yeah, yeah. I'm unbiased. I'll take any customer, right? But yeah, it's one of the most widely used products. It's like the backbone of the internet that fortunately no one knows exists except the companies that are paying for it.
Yeah, this is like when we tell people that they don't need to understand the nuances of blockchain. They just need to know the utility. It's the same thing like when you get in an airplane. You don't necessarily know how it works, but you know that it's really efficient at getting you from point A to point B. So the way that I see this is you're not just trying to improve internet infrastructure, but you're completely rethinking it. So walk us through what the bigger vision is, and maybe even walk us through what that vision means for both an institutional-facing customer as well as for the consumer.
I think as far as like stepping back from consumer focused, the application improvement's tremendous. So right now we're seeing like a lot of video playback with like start time has been cut in half, very little buffering. So it's innovating on existing workflows. We're pretty blind, like forest for the trees. So definitely there's some application sets that this is going to unlock that were unable to be built before. I think probably in some like robotics, probably putting some high frequency trading in the system. Institutional side, those guys are super clever, and most of our networks from like the streaming media industry. So I think that'll be probably the first set that gets onboarded. Also, I'm pretty sure like, governments, kind of military contractors will find this very fascinating because the redundancy it builds in from leveraging like the decentralized internet that we have today. We've got another layer that makes it even more decentralized and robust.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking like in the spirit of decentralization, we're in an era where user generated content is just huge and continuously growing. And I can imagine that there are going to be some really interesting use cases around maybe how someone like me or you or someone with an audience can reach people in maybe even more remote parts of the world where potentially internet latency is troublesome. There's probably some new opportunities for engagement paths that we really haven't been able to tap into before.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's really great engineers that this project called Aptos, and we love Avery, and they're trying to penetrate some of these what do you call it, emerging markets, and trying to go into places like Egypt and different scenarios where there's like lack of data centers, lack of CDNs,
Yeah.
and try to push out some like really cool media platforms. I think, like you're mentioning, you can get paid for like talking about whatever you're an expert in, of like cooking or engineering, whatever, and
Yeah.
there's no middleman to cut that out. So this can truly unlock some really great creator economies. I think before, people have tried this, and they're still storing the data on Amazon and
Yeah.
different things like that. So it was kind of like decentralized facade.
So, and you guys now have, I think it's 200,000 nodes, right?
Yeah, I think it's about 230,000
It
this
was
morning.
200
Yeah.
last week. So these guys are growing. What makes this architecture better performing or faster, or what improvements do you see over something like, something traditional like Cloudflare, for example?
Yeah, so it's essentially distance of light is one of the things we battle. So if you look at a traditional hyperscaler like AWS, from the user, on average, they're about 350 miles. So,
Okay.
so that introduces a lot of latency. And then if you go to like Cloudflare, Akamai, they're what's called in a metro position. So they're still about 150 miles from the user. So that you're still pushing like 80 to 100 milliseconds of latency. And then coordinating with these hyper local nodes using blockchain, now we're down to like 50 to 20 miles from the user. And we're seeing like milliseconds below 10. So we're seeing like 5, 10 milliseconds.
It's
It's,
wild.
it's really amazing the unlock that this brings. And I think it's one of those, like, if you look at people I look up to, like Alex Karp, he says, you want to build something that's 5, 10, 20x better than existing, or just go home and pack it up. And,
Yeah.
we're able to finally deliver those numbers.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And you guys are backed by some pretty serious players, obviously, Solana leaders. I know that we've talked about this. You guys aren't even working with KOLs, but you're getting a lot of the right attention and the right press for the right reasons. What do you think that having these kind of forces behind the project does for your ability to grow, and maybe what advantage does it give you over new entrants in this space?
Yeah, I think we got very blessed that we got connected with Multicoin in particular, and Kyle and myself just really hit it off. I think because we're like super focused on like serious deliverables. He had been candidly, he said he'd been looking for about 5 years someone to build this product, and he was like over the top when I connected with him. And yeah, his connection is super vast. Like if I want to work with integrating the content delivery network into VPNs or any of those, like they're they're just great like network connections. And then yeah, the KOL thing is very strange to me. It sounds like a video game term or something. So I think if we had a KOL, it's probably Anatoly, because
Yeah.
all I do is post up nerd stuff. And
But it's different, right? It's traditionally when projects work with KOLs, they have to allocate a bunch of tokens, and there's an agreement there. But this is just someone thought, wow, this is a really great project you're working on. There's a real use case. We see the gap in the market, and we want to support that, and that's absolutely incredible. I know that you're getting ready for a TGE. Maybe talk to us a little bit about the token, what it's for, what incentive structure you've built in here.
yeah, so there's a foundation, a pipe foundation, that is working on a token, and we're just contributing the core technology and providing some advice. But it seems like the foundation's going to go to a similar path of like most DePINs of following this like burn mint equilibrium model. So essentially, someone like Netflix or whatever would acquire the pipe token, and when they're ready to go through the process of using the bandwidth, they'll burn it. They'll get like a bandwidth data credit. So it's one of those supply models where the supply is constantly shrinking and
Deflationary.
yeah, it's
Yep.
kind of like a Bitcoin, but even more aggressive, I think.
You heard it here, pipes like Bitcoin. Maybe let's talk a little bit about, this is something that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Every DePIN project faces trade-offs, whether it's performative trade-off or adoption or privacy. How do you guys think through some of the trade-offs that you're making, and what sort of guides that decision-making and those principles?
Yeah, so first and foremost, every decision we make is based on customer revenue or no revenue. So that's really how we operate. I think most of the customers we're chasing, they already encrypt the data in transit. It's encrypted when you're on your device when you do the video playback. So there's quite a bit of privacy already built into these workflows. As far as like trying to make sure that there's not a lot of leakage of like what you're watching, things like that. We've definitely tried to incorporate like zero knowledge proofs and things like that so that we can prove bandwidth has been egressed, but not leak any information about the content or the viewer that was watching it.
Yeah. And what's been one of the hardest challenges, or one of the things that you've struggled with the most? I mean, implementing zero knowledge proofs is not easy. Is that one of the things that you would say, or what do you think would be one of the biggest challenges you've had so far?
Yeah, so I remember going through the due diligence with Kyle, and he was like, "You haven't thought about how to prove this bandwidth." And he introduced this technology called ZKTLS, which was really fascinating, but unfortunately, it's got tremendous overhead. Like every packet has to do a new handshake, and it introduces like 100 milliseconds of latency. So we had to throw that completely out the window for like providing this low latency CDN service. So we went back to the drawing board and essentially came up with two new innovations there. So ZK-TCP, we can verify data's been transferred over traditional TCP interfaces. And then we also love this new protocol from Google called Quick. So it's a UDP-based zero round trip. Solana uses it internally for sending the data between the nodes. And we introduced a zero knowledge proof there that we'll also use for bandwidth verification. Yep. Essentially, there's no overhead. It's batched, and then it's verified in async.
Okay. One last question I have is, let's say pipe succeeds at scale. How does that change the experience of the internet for the average user?
Yeah, I think it will have quite a bit of impact. I think initially there would be a significant improvement in just like video playback, loading apps, websites, things like that. Also, we've got a very fascinating footprint of nodes around the globe. So if there's like a leaky transit link or a state since the perform censorship on the internet, we actually see that in real time. And we've got so many nodes we can now route around like slow links, things like that. We've got some really fun math we found is like between like Sao Paulo and Tokyo. If you go through the internet, it's about 250 milliseconds. And typically we can carve a path out using our pop nodes, hopping the data through, and it's like 150 milliseconds. So, we're seeing like 30-40% reduction. I think that's going to be like another product itself where we can just accelerate the path that users access the internet with.
I love that. And that's a really cool way for people that maybe are unfamiliar with CDNs to think about this. It kind of reminds me of Tor and how Tor is specifically designed to help you optimize where you're sending that data through a route that, goes around the traditional route. And this is very much similar in concept. So with that, David, thank you so much for the conversation. Thanks everybody for joining us. And we'll be here for a couple minutes lingering to chat with you.
Thank you so much.